Caroline Bradshaw was still working alone at her accounting firm in Cleveland, Ohio, even after 6 o'clock in the evening. Her gentle personality and deep compassion were well regarded in the workplace, and she was often entrusted with particularly challenging cases. Today, she was concentrating on a client's accounting work with an approaching deadline, forgetting how time was passing. Noticing that it had become completely dark outside, she started and looked at the clock. It was already past 7. She hurriedly closed her laptop and stuffed it into her bag. Her mother Elizabeth and sister Vanessa must be worried. "I'm sorry I'm late again," she called out as she opened the door to her house. Only the sound of the television echoed in the living room. "Oh, Caroline. Don't worry about it. We went ahead and had dinner," Elizabeth said with a slightly tired smile when she saw her daughter. "I saved some for you in the refrigerator." Caroline gave her mother a light kiss and nodded to her sister Vanessa, who was sitting in the adjacent chair. Vanessa just gave her a small wave and returned her gaze to her smartphone. The life of just the three women had continued for over 10 years since Caroline's father, Jonathan, had left home. After the divorce, her father cut off contact, and Caroline's relationship with him naturally became distant. Heading to the kitchen and warming up the dinner that had been prepared for her, Caroline was thinking about the household budget. As the family breadwinner, she was shouldering most of the living expenses for her mother and sister. Elizabeth had taken early retirement and only occasionally worked part-time jobs. Vanessa claimed to be job hunting, but showed no visible effort. About the money. Caroline began as she finished her meal and returned to the living room. "It seems like expenses have been piling up more than expected lately. When you get older, you become more forgetful," Elizabeth shrugged. "I'm probably buying unnecessary things. I might have been shopping too much due to stress," Vanessa said without making eye contact. "I'll be more careful next month." Caroline sighed deeply but couldn't bring herself to blame them. They were family, so supporting each other was natural, she thought. She believed in her family without question. The next day, as Caroline was organizing documents at work, her cell phone rang. The displayed number wasn't familiar, but thinking it might be work-related, she decided to answer. "Is this Caroline Bradshaw?" "This is New Life Insurance," a male voice said. "I'm calling to inform you that the procedure to change the beneficiary of your life insurance has been completed." Caroline frowned. "Change of beneficiary? I haven't made such a request." Last month, an application was submitted to change the beneficiaries to Elizabeth Bradshaw and Vanessa Bradshaw. "Your signature is on it, but..." Caroline's heart raced. She certainly had no memory of signing such a document. However, she couldn't imagine doubting her family. "I think there must be some mistake. I'll check on it later," she said, and after hanging up, she remained motionless for a while. She was shocked by the fact that her signature had been forged, but still she told herself, it must be some kind of mistake. That weekend, Caroline was helping with housecleaning as usual. Her mother and sister had gone shopping, leaving her to watch the house alone. After finishing the living room, she began cleaning her sister's room, a place she didn't usually enter. When she tried to vacuum under the bed, she noticed something. Far back, there was an old laptop covered in dust. It looked like it hadn't been used for years. Caroline pulled it out and picked it up. Vanessa's old laptop. She murmured softly. Driven by curiosity, she decided to press the power button to see if it still worked. Caroline didn't expect it to actually start. However, the dust-covered machine lit up within seconds, and the display began to glow blue. After several startup sounds, the desktop appeared on the screen. It didn't even ask for a password. "It still works," Caroline said with a small sound of surprise. A Messenger app window remained open on the screen. The family group chat. As Caroline casually scrolled through, she noticed an exchange from 3 months ago. "Hey, how much should we make Caroline's life insurance? We want it to be as high as possible. But we should increase it gradually so as not to arouse suspicion. Until then, let's use her as an ATM. We need her savings too." Caroline's hands began to tremble. Her breathing became shallow, and her head spun. She sank into a chair and stared at the conversation before her in disbelief. This had to be a joke. She wanted to believe that. But the conversation continued. With trembling fingers, she scrolled to read more horrifying details of the plan. It was right to change the password for the bank account. She doesn't seem to have noticed. I've also prepared the paperwork for changing the life insurance beneficiary. I can perfectly imitate her signature now. Checking the date of the conversation, it was from last month. It matched the phone call from the insurance company. Caroline felt her stomach ache. Her family, whom she had trusted, her mother and sister whom she had supported, were planning her death. As she continued scrolling, she found her mother and sister coldly discussing plans for her murder. If we administer poison in small amounts, we'll establish a history of poor health. Doctors will take that into account. Caroline reflected on her experiences over the past few weeks. The unexplained illness she had experienced several times after dinner. When she went to the doctor, the symptoms had subsided, and she was told it was due to stress. The carbon monoxide detector's false alarm that had gone off twice at home. The incident when her car's brakes didn't work well. None of it was coincidental. It was attempted murder by her mother and sister. Scrolling further, she came across the most recent conversation, from just last week. Her birthday next month would be the perfect timing. Yes. We'll say we're preparing a special dinner. Caroline's birthday was only 2 weeks away. No, she let out a small voice. She heard the sound of the living room door opening and jumped in surprise. Her mother and sister had returned. Hurriedly, she turned off the laptop and put it back in its place. Caroline? Where are you? Came Elizabeth's voice. In here, I was cleaning Vanessa's room. Caroline tried to steady her trembling voice. The door opened, and her mother peeked in. Oh, thank you. But you should let Vanessa clean her own room. Don't worry about it. Caroline tried to smile, but her facial muscles wouldn't cooperate. Elizabeth looked at her daughter curiously. Are you all right? You look pale. Just a little tired. Caroline stood up, holding the vacuum cleaner. I'm finished now, so I'll go back to my room. You do that. You need rest, Elizabeth said kindly. Caroline felt a chill at the false care in her voice. Back in her room, Caroline closed the door, leaned her back against it, and slid down to the floor. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She was devastated by the reality that the family she had trusted was trying to take her life. What should I do? She whispered. Should she go to the police? But would the evidence be enough? Would the police act based only on messages from an old laptop? What if her mother and sister claimed that she was mentally unstable? Caroline hugged her knees and cried quietly. After a long time passed, she made a decision. I have to run away. Right now. That night, Caroline feigned calmness and acted as usual. She couldn't swallow a bite of dinner but pretended to be ill and excused herself early. After her mother and sister had gone to sleep, she secretly began packing the bare essentials. Wallet, ID, some cash, and her cell phone. She had decided to disappear the next morning. In her dark room, she stared at the moonlight outside the window, reflecting on her life until now. The pain of being betrayed by the family she had loved was too deep for words. By the time daylight began to filter through the gaps in the curtains, Caroline was already awake. In fact, she had barely slept. The bedside clock showed 5 o'clock. Plenty of time to leave before her family woke up. She moved carefully, taking the small bag she had prepared last night, making sure the floor didn't creak. Then, she wrote a short note on a notepad. Leaving early for an urgent work matter. Will be back this evening. This should give her at least a day's grace. She didn't intend to return, but they couldn't know that. Leaving the house, Caroline first headed to the nearest ATM. She withdrew the maximum amount possible from her account, then went to a branch of the bank on the other side of town to secure more cash. She noticed the suspicious look from the bank teller but made an excuse about moving expenses. Next, she stopped at a phone store and purchased a new prepaid phone. Finally, she headed to the bus terminal. "One ticket to Duluth, Minnesota, please," Caroline said at the counter. Her voice was trembling. "One way or round trip?" the clerk asked. "One way," Caroline answered immediately. The bus was scheduled to depart at 9 in the morning. Sitting in the waiting room, Caroline felt her old phone begin to receive calls from her mother. She decided to ignore them. She wasn't ready yet. Eventually, the calls stopped, and a message arrived instead. "Good morning. You're early today. What would you like for dinner?" Caroline gave a bitter smile. The murderous intent hidden behind such an everyday question. She didn't reply. As the bus departed and the cityscape of Cleveland gradually diminished through the window, Caroline finally felt a bit of relief. But at the same time, her anxiety about what to do next intensified. Her maternal grandmother, Martha Williams, lived in Duluth. She was one of the few family members who had been kind to Caroline when she was a child. However, Elizabeth and Martha had been estranged for years, and they had cut off contact since Caroline was a teenager. Even so, the only refuge Caroline could think of now was her grandmother's house. The bus journey was long, and Caroline was lost in thought as she watched the scenery outside the window. Why had her mother and sister tried to kill her? Was it just for money? Or was there some other reason? She had always thought she was doing her best for her family. By evening, calls and messages from her mother began to increase rapidly. At first, they were concerned in tone, but gradually they became more frantic. "Caroline, where are you? I called your work, and they said you were off today." Caroline disconnected the phone and removed the battery. She needed to make sure they couldn't contact her anymore. The following afternoon, the bus finally arrived in Duluth. The air in the town was cold, with a wind that bit more sharply than in Cleveland. Caroline opened her map app and checked her grandmother's address. She had visited only once more than 15 years ago, but her memory was vague. Taking a taxi and giving the address, the driver headed toward the suburbs. Caroline felt a bit calmer seeing the lake view from the car window. "Here we are," said the taxi driver, stopping in front of a small blue house. Flowers were planted in the garden, swaying in the wind. Caroline took a deep breath and approached the front door of the house. Her hand trembled as she pressed the doorbell. Would her grandmother accept her after no contact for so long? The door opened, and a small, white-haired woman appeared. Martha Williams's face was deeply etched with the passage of years, but her blue eyes were still sharp and full of intelligence. "Who is?" Martha began, and then gasped. "Caroline?" "Hello, Grandma," Caroline said in a small voice. "May I come in?" Tears welled up in Martha's eyes, and she opened her arms wide. "Of course, my dear child. You're always welcome." Caroline surrendered herself to her grandmother's warm embrace, and finally, the emotions she had been suppressing poured out. She broke down in tears. In the living room of Martha's house, with a warm cup of tea in hand, Caroline found the courage to tell everything. The chat she had found on her sister's laptop, the insurance fraud plan, the murder plot by her mother and sister. Her voice trembled and broke several times as she spoke. Martha listened in silence. Her expression was a mixture of sadness and anger. Finally, she let out a deep sigh. "Your mother was greedy from a young age," Martha said quietly. "She was someone who would do anything for money. But I never imagined it would go this far." "I can't believe it," Caroline said in a trembling voice. "Why me? They're my family." Martha squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "You're safe now. Stay here. I'll protect you." The next day, Martha contacted her longtime friend, attorney Thomas Henderson. Thomas was retired but didn't hesitate to offer legal advice. He listened carefully to Caroline's story and advised her on how to preserve evidence and ensure her safety. "Do you have any evidence, like screenshots of the chat?" he asked. Caroline shook her head. "I panicked and couldn't think that far. But..." She suddenly stood up. "I took photos with my smartphone. I thought I needed evidence before running away." She took out her new phone and put the battery back in her old one. When she turned it on, notifications of dozens of missed calls and messages appeared. Ignoring them, she opened the gallery app. Sure enough, there were several photos capturing the contents of the chat. "Will this be enough evidence?" She offered her phone to Thomas. "Not sufficient, but it could be the starting point for an investigation," he said. "We should contact the local police." Meanwhile, in Cleveland, Elizabeth and Vanessa had noticed Caroline's disappearance and were panicking. At first, they thought she was just running late, but when she didn't return home that night and wasn't answering her phone, they became worried. "I checked her room," Vanessa told her mother. "Some clothes and valuables are missing. She ran away." "Do you think she found out something?" Elizabeth asked anxiously. "Don't be ridiculous," Vanessa lowered her voice. "How could she? We've been careful." However, their anxiety only increased. The next day, they filed a missing person report with the police. To play the role of the concerned family, Vanessa also posted on social media, "My sister has gone missing. If anyone has any information, please contact me," gathering sympathy. Detective Jim Morrison of the Cleveland Police was questioning Elizabeth and Vanessa in the Bradshaw family living room. "Was there anything unusual before your daughter disappeared? Any family disputes?" "None whatsoever," Elizabeth shook her head. "Caroline is a gentle child who doesn't like conflicts." "Was there anything in her room that might provide a clue?" "Nothing. Just some clothes and valuables were missing," Vanessa answered. "It seems she left of her own accord." The detective took notes as he listened to their story. "What about her friends or boyfriend?" "She has a few friends, but no boyfriend," Vanessa said. "She was too busy with work to have time for that." The detective nodded. "Well, I'll also check with her workplace." "And could I have a recent photo of her?" Elizabeth handed over a recent photo of Caroline. It was a family picture of the three of them, and only Caroline had a genuine smile. "Don't worry. In most cases, adult missing persons return of their own will," the detective said as he stood up. When the door closed, Elizabeth and Vanessa looked at each other. "What if she knows something and has talked to the police?" Elizabeth whispered. "They can't do anything with just her word and no evidence," Vanessa said coldly. "Remember, we're the concerned family here." In Duluth, Caroline was heading to the local police station with Martha and Thomas's help. The police officers, initially skeptical, began to understand the gravity of the situation when they saw the chat contents, the history of insurance policy changes, and the record of Caroline's suspicious illnesses. The Duluth police contacted the Ohio State Police, and information was shared with the Cleveland police. Caroline's missing person case suddenly transformed into an attempted murder investigation. All rise. A tense atmosphere swept through the courtroom. Caroline sat next to her lawyer, her hands tightly clasped. Elizabeth and Vanessa were in the defendant's box, wearing orange prison uniforms. Since their arrest 2 months ago, they had been detained separately. The case had developed rapidly. The joint investigation by the Duluth and Cleveland police turned Caroline's suspicions into certainty. Samples taken from her home kitchen detected traces of thallium, and there were signs of deliberate damage to her car's brake lines. And most decisively, was the discovery of Vanessa's old laptop. When police technicians recovered the data, not only did they find a complete record of the chat Caroline had seen, but also details of the plan spanning several years. Defendants Elizabeth Bradshaw and Vanessa Bradshaw, you are charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and extortion, prosecutor Karen Levin read out. How do you plead? Not guilty, Elizabeth answered with a resolute attitude. Vanessa hesitated for a moment before saying in a small voice, not guilty. She glanced at Caroline but quickly looked away. As the trial progressed, the prosecution presented evidence of the long-term financial exploitation and psychological abuse that Elizabeth and Vanessa had inflicted on Caroline. Unauthorized use of Caroline's credit cards, withdrawals from her account without permission, and large loans applied for in her name. The defendants saw Caroline Bradshaw as nothing more than a financial resource, the prosecutor appealed to the jury. And when there was nothing left to squeeze from her, they targeted her life. However, even more shocking facts came to light during the trial. Elizabeth had previously committed insurance fraud for money, and Vanessa had been her accomplice. 10 years ago, Elizabeth had taken out a life insurance policy using a friend's name, and after that friend accidentally died, she received the insurance money. The police had processed it as a mere accident at the time, but a reinvestigation began based on the current evidence. And another shocking fact, Jonathan, Caroline's father, had left home to escape Elizabeth's obsessive financial demands. On the fourth day of the trial, the prosecution called Jonathan Bradshaw as a new witness. Caroline felt a tightness in her chest seeing her father for the first time in 15 years. Instead of the vibrant man she remembered, there stood a tired-looking man in his 50s. "Mr. Bradshaw, why did you leave your family?" the prosecutor asked. Jonathan cleared his throat and began to answer, choosing his words carefully. "Elizabeth, when she married me, she thought I came from a wealthy background. But that wasn't the case. My income alone couldn't maintain the standard of living she wanted, and she gradually became more angry and demanding." "What kind of demands specifically?" "She always wanted expensive things. She wanted to live beyond my salary. And..." He paused once. "She suggested insurance fraud. She planned to take out a high-value policy in my name and stage an accident for me." A shock ran through the courtroom. Caroline gasped. "I refused." But her pressure only increased. "Ultimately, I became afraid and decided to leave home." Jonathan's shoulders dropped. "My biggest regret is leaving my daughters with her. Especially Caroline." He looked at Caroline. His eyes reflected deep remorse. "Were you able to maintain a relationship with Caroline?" "For the first few years, we kept in touch, but it became increasingly difficult due to Elizabeth's interference. She changed my contact information, hid my letters. Eventually, our relationship was severed." Caroline wiped her tears with a trembling hand. She remembered being told that letters from her father never arrived. It had all been lies. The defense attorneys tried to question the reliability of the evidence, but the weight of digital and physical evidence couldn't be overturned. Vanessa's lawyer in particular argued that she was under her mother's influence, attempting to mitigate her responsibility. As the trial progressed, Vanessa began to crumble. On the 7th day, she suddenly requested a plea deal with the prosecution. She sought a reduced sentence in exchange for testifying against her mother. "Elizabeth made all the plans," Vanessa testified on the stand with a trembling voice. "She told me that if Caroline was gone, we could live richly off her insurance money. At first, I thought it was a joke, but she was serious." "And you agreed to this?" the prosecutor pressed. "I..." Vanessa hesitated for a moment. "I couldn't escape my mother's control. When she asked me to do something, I just followed. It's always been that way." "But looking at the chat records, you were also actively contributing ideas, weren't you?" Vanessa lowered her eyes. "Yes. I cannot escape my guilt." On the final day of the trial, Caroline was asked to take the stand. Despite the mixture of fear and sadness she felt, she found the courage to tell the truth. She spoke about the details of her mother and sister's cruel plan, the pain of betrayal she felt, and the days of fear. "Defendants, what do you think of the witness's testimony?" the judge finally asked the two. Elizabeth answered with a cold expression. "My daughter has always been good at drawing attention. This is no exception." Meanwhile, Vanessa said through tears, I am sorry to Caroline. I don't expect to be forgiven, but I am truly sorry." After a short deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous guilty verdict. "Defendant Elizabeth Bradshaw, the jury has found you guilty of attempted murder and insurance fraud," the judge said with a stern expression. "The court sentences you to 15 years in prison." Defendant Vanessa Bradshaw, taking into account your cooperative attitude, the court sentences you to 8 years in prison. After the sentence was handed down, Caroline let out a deep sigh of relief outside the courtroom. Her grandmother Martha stood beside her, gently holding her hand. "Is it over now?" Caroline asked in a small voice. The trial is over, Martha said. But your life is just beginning from here. In the courthouse hallway, Jonathan approached hesitantly. Caroline, can we talk? Caroline nodded, albeit with hesitation. Rebuilding a relationship with her father wouldn't be easy, but at least they could start by knowing and understanding the truth. A small light of hope kindled within her. She had truly become free. 3 years after the trial, on a peaceful spring day, Caroline gazed out the window of the Duluth Library. She had been working here as a librarian for 2 years. The quiet environment surrounded by books had helped heal her past traumas. Caroline, could you help me find where this book belongs? Turning around, she saw David Martin with a warm smile. A 40-year-old history teacher, Caroline and David had met when he visited the library for research. Initially cautious, Caroline gradually opened her heart to David's sincerity and kindness. Now they were engaged and preparing for their wedding next month. Of course, Caroline smiled, taking the book and guiding him to the shelf. In the evening, she returned to Martha's house. Her grandmother, now 78, had become somewhat weaker in her legs and back, but still energetically tended to the flowers in her garden. By living with her grandmother, Caroline had come to know the warmth of a true family. David called, Martha called from the living room. He said it's about the final confirmation for the wedding. Thank you, Caroline smiled. You know, Grandma, I'm really happy, she said quietly. I'm so glad I came here then. Martha took her granddaughter's hand and replied, if you're happy, I'm happy too. Her relationship with her father Jonathan was also gradually being repaired. He had moved from Arizona to Minnesota to live near Caroline. It was difficult to recover the lost time, but the two were taking it one step at a time. Dad says he wants to give a speech at the wedding, Caroline told Martha. He's come a long way too, Martha said gently. That night, Caroline received an envelope. It bore a prison postmark. She hesitantly opened it. It was a letter from her sister Vanessa. Caroline. I know there's no way I can make up for hurting you. But I want to tell you something. I've started studying psychology in prison and have found the courage to face myself. It's true that I couldn't escape my mother's control, but that's no excuse. I wish for your happiness. I've sworn not to become like our mother. Hoping for a day when you might forgive me. Vanessa. Caroline stared at the letter for a long time. She couldn't forgive immediately, but she wanted to believe in her sister's change. Letters had also come from Elizabeth, but they contained no words of apology, only content suggesting she was the victim. Caroline had decided not to reply to those. She won't change. And that's not my responsibility, she reminded herself. Gazing at the full moon visible from her bedroom window, Caroline reflected on the journey of her life. Despite experiencing a terrible betrayal, she ultimately found true happiness. We can't choose our past, she whispered quietly. But we can carve out our own future. Her new life was warmly shining in the light of love and trust.